Howdy, friends. Welcome back to Feedstuffs 365. Andy Vance joining you from Minneapolis as we're gathering for the Midwest Poultry Convention. First time in a couple years we've been able to gather physically here as an industry. The broiler, poultry, and turkey industry is part of the poultry industry gathering here in Minneapolis, and a couple of representatives of the National Turkey Federation joining me. CEO and President Joel Brandenberger and Vice President of Policy, Lisa Picard. We'll talk about some policy issues with Lisa in a moment. But Joel, I want to start with the news of the day, if you will, and that is that the industry is dealing with and concerned about outbreaks of high-path avian influenza. So could you give us an overview of what your members and the members of the poultry industry and the Turkey Federation are dealing with high-path as we know it at the moment?
Yeah. Well, Andy, thank you, first of all, for having us here. And, that is the story of the moment in the industry right now. Obviously, given what the industry experienced 7 years ago, there's a lot of concern. We've had a number of turkey flocks affected. The egg layers have also been affected. And different from 2015 is we've also seen some broiler flocks affected as well. It's primarily brought to us by wild birds, just as 2015 started. There is what I would say a sense of maybe cautious hope or optimism that some of the lessons learned from 2015 may help us keep this from becoming quite as widespread an incident as we saw then. There are no guarantees, of course, with anything like this, save for one. I'd say it is a guarantee that the industry is as well prepared for this as it has been at any point in its history. There was a lot that we came to learn about wild bird transmission, the transmissibility through wind, not that it's aerosolized, but the virus can attach to small dust particles and move with it. So we have learned a lot. The precautions we've been able to take have evolved because of that. We don't know yet where this is going to end, but we're very hopeful that we have some tools that we didn't have 7 years ago to keep this under control.
We talked earlier in the week with Chad Gregory with UEP, so getting the perspective from the egg industry. And one of the things Chad mentioned in terms of differences between the 2015 outbreak and this is that maybe we're seeing these breaks a little earlier in the season than we had. Is that something that we should be concerned about?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, they're definitely earlier. At this point, 7 years ago, when the Midwest Poultry Federation Convention was held, it was over in St. Paul back then, but there had been 5 cases total nationwide, 1 in California, 3 in Arkansas, Missouri, 1 in Minnesota. That was it at this point. We've obviously had a few more, but I'd put an asterisk around that as to how significant it might be. I mean, I think Chad's right. It's a great observation. But at the same time, when we had a smaller contained situation the following year in 2016, that emerged in January. It emerged and ended in January. We had a contained situation in 2020 that for 24 hours was the biggest thing that we had to worry about in the turkey industry. Then the world started shutting down. But it was huge in our industry. There was a handful of farms in the Carolinas, and we were very concerned. It appeared right about this exact time of year, maybe a week or two earlier in 2020, but it was contained and held in relative check. I think the amount of wild birds that they're finding with this indicates that probably we won't be able to, replicate 2016 or 2020, but I still think there's a lot of hope with what we learned that it won't be 2015 either.
Well, in that, those learnings you talked about and the changes, things we've come, I think, a fair way in terms of just understanding of biosecurity and the importance of staying on top of it. When you're talking with members, given what we've been through the last 2 years, given some of the challenges we're facing with the supply chain and so on, what's the pulse of the average producer like right now? How much additional stress is this on top of the stress they're already feeling?
It is stressful in the sense that you just keep waiting for what's the next situation going to be. But I will say that in talking with them, they really do feel like they really are extraordinarily well prepared this time. And I'll just give you one small example, and here's a good way to put it. One of the learnings that is helping this, and it really started here in Minnesota, where they had the most widespread outbreaks in 2015, is we started learning a lot about how to recognize the presence of the disease before the mortality really set in. And you're really seeing that this time. In most cases, we've identified the presence before you have significant mortality at the houses, looking for things like reduced water consumption. That's measured so accurately. If you see that, that's a warning sign. Looking for what you could broadly put as overall depression in the birds, the less movement, less activity, and so forth. And that's really a key to helping get this taken care of, is recognizing it rapidly, getting the test, getting the confirmation rapidly, and beginning to populating as rapidly as possible. In addition to all the other biosecurity things, that's why we feel like maybe we have an edge compared to 7 years ago.
Great insights, and appreciate you putting it in that context. I think it's really important to keep that context of what we've learned rather than just the stress. It's one more thing on top of a lot of other things.
No, it doesn't help given the last 2 or 3 years. It's really unfortunate, but there is a feeling that we've done a lot to prepare for this moment.
I want to shift gears from animal disease issues to policy issues. Let's go to the Hill inside the swamp. Lisa Picard handling policy for the Federation. What's on the agenda for turkey producers in Washington right now in terms of things that you and your colleagues are talking with legislators and regulators about?
Salmonella, and salmonella. We are really at a key point with the interest level of our regulators, of our legislators, and of consumer groups, wanting to understand why salmonella numbers still are what they are, why there isn't some great flashy news story that says we don't have salmonella in the U.S. anymore. I think the idea of going through what we've gone through with COVID, and the vaccine was our cure and our savior in the COVID situation, has put a lot of pressure on our producers to make sure they're doing everything on the live side. But it's also given us a challenge as the industry to explain to people vaccines are excellent. They have a very important place in, turkey industry and in raising turkeys, but they are not the full solution, right? This is and if anyone out there has the silver bullet and I haven't heard about it, I would beg them to call me. But I know so many incredibly intelligent people that are working on this 24/7. This is not an easy fix, and it's never been an easy story to convey. But since the whole world has been following COVID and seeing that 1 shot or 4 shots, depending on what level you are, as far as your immunity, seems to be the answer, we're having to do a little bit of that comparison of turkeys aren't humans. COVID and salmonella is not the same thing. And then still reminding people, if you cook your food to 165, you don't have an issue. So it's a whole bunch of different levels of education for our folks in Washington, but it's also going back to our producers. They're doing so much. There is so much work going on. I want to make sure that they get credit for all of it. And that's, I think, one of the things we're really working hard is to make sure that that information is available to our regulators and legislators as well.
It's funny when I talk with folks who are involved in the poultry industries, not just turkey, but kind of across the gamut. We're all concerned about salmonella. But if I talk to nutritionists, they're thinking about what are they doing that can help fight it. You're talking with people in the processing sector, they're thinking about it. So every step along the way, it seems like there's quite a lot of awareness that this is a challenge we've all got to be continuing to work on.
And I think you're exactly right. And I never fail to be impressed about how everyone in our industry, no matter where they are cognizant of this challenge, are cognizant of the PR aspect of it, and that people are familiar with salmonella. And somehow we haven't, as an industry and as a government, gotten over that, what I consider as a kind of an education hump to people who are preparing their food. I very proudly give out food thermometers every Christmas. Okay, everyone gets a food thermometer, but that's not something that people understand. And I've looked at case studies on things, with getting people to use seatbelts, getting people to wear motorcycle helmets. I understand there's a learning curve, and certainly we saw that around COVID too. We can't lose this opportunity as people are focusing on their health, and we've finally gotten people to wash their hands, right? We had a huge decrease in foodborne illness last year. I want to make sure somehow all of the food production industry and all of the food safety educators are able to capitalize on that moment.
Yeah, and that's an interesting data point to note that we saw a reduction in foodborne illness because we've done a better job of washing our hands. How's the reception to that story when you're talking with the regulatory and legislative class? Is there an aha moment there, or they're like, oh, that's nice, but
I think it depends on who you're talking to, right? 2021 wasn't a cut and dry year for a whole lot of things, and certainly our public health professionals had a lot on their plate. And, there were people who maybe might have gone to an emergency room that didn't because it either was full or they were nervous. So I think there's a whole lot of things in the mix, but we had a 25% decrease. All of that is not just stuff to blow out the window. There are some pieces there that we can capitalize on and things that we can learn from.
Lisa Picard, handling policy for the Federation. Joel Brandenberger, CEO, thank you for the updates on two very important issues facing the turkey industry and poultry producers across the spectrum. Stay tuned for more of our coverage of Midwest Poultry Convention. We'll be here throughout the week. You can follow us at Feedstuffs 365, as well as via the Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn profiles of Feedstuffs. From Minneapolis and the convention, I'm Andy Vance.